I have a secret to share with you, something that every photographer knows, but no one ever teaches you until now. It's called the exposure triangle. I'm going to show you how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Let's go. This is an amazing diagram that shows you the relationship between ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and how they all work together to create an exposure. And it's really simple once you get the hang of it. I've got 3 photos here, all taken on the same camera with the same lens. The only difference is the aperture. On the left, we've got f1.8, and on the right, we've got f11. What do you notice? This is the inside of a DSLR, and you can see right here a set of blades. Control over your camera settings, creativity over your final image, and confidence in your ability to capture any shot you want. Let me show you. These are the aperture blades. When they open up, you get more light. So I put my camera into manual mode, and I could use any combination of ISO, shutter, and aperture to make a bright exposure. Well, I'm going to have to choose between 2 things. Do I want a fast shutter or a shallow depth of field? If I choose a fast shutter, I'm going to be able to freeze the action, but I won't be able to blur out my background. If I choose a shallow depth of field, I will be able to blur out my background, but I won't be able to freeze the action. Here's one option. 1600, shutter speed 1, 250th in aperture, 2.8. You're always balancing the 3 settings to get the shot that you want. There are situations where you do and have time to think, or maybe you do and know which setting will have the biggest impact on your shot. You can tell because she's using a fast shutter to freeze the models in mid-pose. If you want more brightness, raise your ISO, or use a wider aperture, or use a slower shutter. If you want to freeze action, use a faster shutter, or use a wider aperture. How you get control over your camera settings, creativity over your final image, and confidence in your ability to capture any shot you want. How bright, how sharp, how deep. If you want more depth of field, use a smaller aperture. And if you want to blur out your background, use a wider aperture. And in those cases, it's good to have a cheat sheet. So here's one I made for you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a thumbs up. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Another option would be ISO 100, shutter speed 1, 13th and aperture f11. They both result in a great shot. She's shooting some architecture, and she's changing her shutter speed dial to dial in the perfect exposure. You can tell because her ISO and aperture are staying the same. But here's the thing. One is not better than the other. They're just different. Every photographer has their own style and preferences, and that's what makes this so exciting. Possibilities are endless. It's up to you to decide which one you prefer. You can tell because he's using a slow shutter to get the motion blur trails. For example, would you rather have more brightness or more depth of field? You can tell because he is using a long lens and a slow shutter to get the perfect shot of the hummingbird. When they close down, you get less light. That's what controls the brightness of your image. I'm shooting basketball and I want to make sure that I freeze the ball in midair. I'm going to have to make a decision. Do I want to shoot at ISO 1600 or ISO 100? Well, ISO 100 is going to give me cleaner images, but it might not be bright enough to get a good exposure. So I might have to sacrifice some quality for the sake of having enough light. And right here is the shutter. When it opens and closes quickly, you get a quick exposure. When it stays open longer, you get a longer exposure. And right here is the sensor. When it's hit by photons, it creates an electrical charge, which is what creates the signal that's turned into an image. The ISO controls how sensitive the sensor is to those photons. Well, on the left, the background is completely blurry, and the background on the right is tack sharp. There's a compromise to be made. How much depth of field do you want versus how much background detail are you willing to lose? The only difference is the ISO. From left to right, you've got ISO 100, 800, and 3200. Can you guess which is which? Well, number 100 is on the left, number 800 in the middle, and 3200 on the right. As we move from left to right, the image gets brighter, because there's more gain being applied to the sensor, which results in more light being captured. This makes sense when you think about it. Lower ISO value means less sensitivity and therefore darker images. A higher ISO value means more sensitivity and therefore brighter images. It comes with a trade-off, which is noise. You can see it here. The corners of these images, the noisiest part is the darkest part. That's because there's not enough light in those pixels to distinguish the signal from the noise. So there's a compromise to be made. How much brightness do you need versus how much noise are you willing to accept? Let's start with the top point of the triangle, ISO. The second point of the triangle is shutter speed. Here are 3 photos of a waterfall. They're all the same. The only difference is the shutter speed. From left to right, we've got 1/1000th of a second, 1/60th of a second, and 2 seconds. Now if we look at the image on the left, it's completely frozen. The water looks solid. Now in the center, we still have a pretty good sense of what's happening. The water looks like it's flowing. And then finally on the right, everything is completely blurred. Because the shutter was open for so long, there's a compromise to be made. How much action do you want to freeze versus how much motion blur are you willing to accept? And the third point of the triangle is aperture. Here are 2 photos of the same model. And all of this happens inside of your camera. Let me show you. But why should you care? Well, it's because understanding the exposure triangle gives you control, creativity, and confidence. Here's a scene with low light, and I want to take a photo of this display. So let's pretend that I want to freeze some action. What about if I want to blur out my background? So this is why it's important to understand the exposure triangle. It's because you're always making these kinds of decisions. Now let's talk about cheats. It shows you the impact of ISO, shutter, and aperture on light, motion, and depth. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide which settings you want to use. This is a photographer working in golden hour. This is a street photographer. He's shooting cars driving by at night. This is a fashion photographer. This is a nature photographer. This is a wedding photographer. You can tell because she is using a wide aperture to blur out the background and focus on the couple. I know it all starts with understanding the exposure triangle. It's the foundation of manual photography. It's like learning the language of light. Once you know the rules, you can break them. Just remember, every setting tells a story. Now it's your turn. Go out there, practice, experiment, and let your camera become your voice. Thank you so much for watching.